I want to bring in Alina Polyakova. She's the president and CEO for the Center of European Policy Analysis and an adjunct professor of European Studies at Johns Hopkins School of Advanced International Studies. Alina, always great to have you on. So let's start with these sanctions, because Vladimir Putin has sort of built expectations up, right, that the Russian public should expect these sanctions and that they were not in response to Russian aggression, but an attempt by the West to punish Russia. And so far, it seems like Russians are buying that and rallying around the flag, as opposed to being angry at their leadership for putting them in this position. Does that surprise you?
Well, unfortunately, that is very much the case. You know, we have seen a poll recently by an independent pollster that's still operating in Russia that just a little over 80% of Russians support what the government calls a special operation, aka the war in Ukraine. That's quite a shocking number, given the kinds of atrocities many of us have been seeing in Ukraine being carried out by Russian military forces. Sadly, it doesn't surprise me, however. For many decades, the Russian people have been subjected to increasing repression, information control. And now we've seen that kind of repression really pick up. And what that means is that most Russians get all of their information from state-controlled television outlets, media outlets. And of course, those outlets tell a completely different story that's completely disconnected from reality. And unfortunately, the majority of Russians do seem to believe at least some part of that narrative that is a complete lie and is false. But that is what we're seeing today in Russia, and it's quite sad.
Yeah, on the one hand, of course, you have to take even independent pollsters, right, with a grain of salt, given the oppression and the totalitarian regime that really Russia has turned into. Many people fearful of responding in any way that would be critical of the government. But that having been said, I know you and I have discussed this anecdotally. People that we've known firsthand in Russia who maybe in the past have been critical of Vladimir Putin are also sort of using this whataboutism or suggesting while war is bad, there's a reason why this is all happening. I'd like to get you to respond, though, to a Kremlin critic and political scientist, Andrei Kolesnikov, and what he wrote. He wrote a piece in which he said, the nation follows Putin like the blind leading the blind. When a nation becomes blind, deaf, and dumb, Mariupol and Bucha become possible. I think if we're honest with each other, many people would have expected to see more outrage out of the Russian public than we have seen so far. Is this a sign of what's to come?
Well, unfortunately, and Andrei is very much correct. Mr. Putin has taken Russia to the past. He's taken Russia to a very dark time in its history, the Stalinist era, when people were afraid to speak out, when they preferred to look away and not acknowledge what's happening in the world. They were too afraid to ask questions because the kind of repression they would face, being either thrown in the gulag back in those days or being just forced to flee and become dissidents, that is the reality that Russians live in today. And it is easier to look away and to just turn on the television than it is to ask the kinds of questions that will bring up really existential questions about Russia as a country, Russia as a people, and the nature of Mr. Putin's regime. And I think Mr. Kolesnikov put it exactly right. It is the blind leading the blind, because Russians are not asking those questions because they don't want to face the reality. Of course, it's likely not everyone, but those who are asking those questions are being thrown in jail or they're leaving the country.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing, talking about leaving the country, we're seeing the largest mass wave of exodus out of Russia, obviously forced exodus because of Russia's war in Ukraine, of professionals that are leaving in droves, hundreds of thousands of intellectuals and executives and IT experts, you name it, have left Russia and Ukraine, again, forced to do so. Your institution, CEPA, has launched an initiative to help fund some of these refugees now as a way of bringing them to the United States, specifically those in the arts area, journalists, what have you. I mean, you and I are both refugees to this country as well. Talk about why this is so important to the United States and to you personally.
Well, we have seen over and over again how dissidents, activists, political leaders over time have delivered such great impact to the United States. And you look at Silicon Valley, for example, you can't walk a block without hitting someone that has a Russian or a Slavic name. There's a reason for that. For many years, Russia has produced some of the best when it comes to professionals, artists, writers. Everyone can name probably at least one Russian author who's listening in, or ballerinas, artists, all of these people. And it's very, very sadly, these are the exact people that are being forced to leave Russia because they can no longer live in the repression and the kind of dictatorship that Mr. Putin has instituted there. It is up to us in the United States to take advantage of these people and provide them a lifeline so they can still contribute. And I think more importantly than that, at some point, things will change in Russia. Mr. Putin is not immortal. And when that moment comes, there has to be Russians that go back to their country and try to change it for the better. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at CEPA, is make sure the Russian civil society doesn't die with Mr. Putin in power. We have to help them survive so that in the long term, Russians can take up the reins of changing Russia. And that's why CEPA has started this new fellowship fund to support independent voices, independent journalists, all of those hundreds of thousands of people. The need is huge, who are no longer able to live in Russia.
Yeah, it is an important mission. We should just note that the CEO of Yandex, which is Russia's version of Google, just fled the country to Israel. So it's very important morally, and I would just say for national security and economic reasons, to bring these people to the United States as well. Alina Polyakova, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Bianna.